Hello everybody, Chris Van Meter here, joined with Andrew Boswell. We've been bringing you coverage all weekend long of the $20,000 Modern Open here in Charlotte, North Carolina, and it's all culminated to this final moment. Bob Huang on Goryo's Vengeance was our first seed. Brian Huffman on Jun was our 7th seed. They are ready to do battle in the finals.
Yeah, and so what we're going to see here is Brian is going to be looking to start the game with maybe a discard spell into a Tarmogoyf. He wants to get some disruption, but he also really wants to get some pressure. He's set up to disrupt Bob and slow him down, but he's not actually set up to stop Bob, and Bob is going to combo off at some point if Brian doesn't develop a clock. On Bob's side, he just wants to combo off as soon as possible. He has no interest in interacting at all with Brian if he can help it. He just kind of wants to do his thing and almost pretend his opponent's not even there.
Well, for Brian's sake, let's hope he is there and he can put up a little bit of resistance. So Bob's going to go ahead and start off with a Pluto Delta and pass. Brian's going to go ahead and sacrifice his Bloodstained Mire. And it looks like he does have a discard spell in hand, so I imagine he's going to get an untapped land and cast it.
Yeah, this is definitely the best start that Brian can have. This is exactly how he wants to start the matchup. Ideally, he'll be able to drop a Dark Confidant or a Tarmogoyf next turn, and we'll see what Bob's working with and how effective this Thoughtseize can be. A lot of times with these combo decks, discard spells can be really effective because sometimes if you can just pick that right card, their whole draw will fall apart, and we'll see how redundant things are for Bob's hand.
So it looks like Bob's going to reveal a Nourishing Shoal, a World Spine Worm, a Desperate Ritual, Through the Breach, Goryo's Vengeance, and a Scalding Tarn. This is a very good hand that is really only missing a Gristlebrand or some way to put Gristlebrand into the graveyard. I'm interested to see what Brian decides to take here. My guess is Goryo's Vengeance, but I'm not a Jun master. Yeah.
Well, I really like Bob's hand. I mean, he's really close to just comboing off, like you said. I mean, if he just draws a Faithless Looting into a Grizzlebrand, things could be over very, very quickly. And so Brian, seeing that that could be a possible line of play, is going to be taking away that Goryo's Vengeance and hoping that he'll draw some more discard spells to pick something out later on. None of those cards in Bob's hand will be able to be played anytime soon.
So it looks like he does take that Goryo's Vengeance. Brian's going to drop down to 15 from that fetch into shock onto a Thoughtseize. Bob's going to go ahead and fetch a Watery Grave tapped on his end step, and there is that Gristlebrand. So now he is just a few cards away from being able to put that onto the battlefield with that Through the Breach.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, right now he only needs the Desperate Ritual essentially puts him up 1 mana, so if he can get to 4 lands and cast that Desperate Ritual, he can put Through the Breach into play and potentially win. So as things are right now, Bob has a good chance of getting a turn 4 win, and Brian needs to develop some sort of pressure, get a little bit more discard, and we'll see how things go.
Now, I believe that the Splice onto Arcane cost for Desperate Ritual is only 2 mana. And if that's the case, if Bob happens to draw a land next turn, what he can do is he can cast that Nourishing Shoal, splicing the Desperate Ritual onto it, and then he can play his land, cast Desperate Ritual, and his land will bring him up to 5 mana. So that turn, he can put his Gristlebrand onto the battlefield next turn if he happens to draw a land or a Simian Spirit Guide. That is exciting.
Yeah, that's a great point. So one of the things that's interesting about that Goryo's Vengeance deck is it uses the Splice onto Arcane mechanic, which is something that we really haven't seen get printed on any cards in a long time, and it certainly hasn't been used at all in a very long time.
Now, Brian does have a Terminate in his hand, but he has to feel pretty safe that Bob's not going to be able to do anything here, so he's going to just go ahead and cast that Scavenging Ooze onto just to put a threat onto the battlefield. Now, Bob is going to fetch on Brian's end step and get a Scalding or a Steam Vents tapped, so let's see what he does on his turn.
One thing that can be interesting from the Jun side is Liliana of the Veil is one of the good cards to fight these combo decks, but because of the fact that Bob sometimes wants creatures in the graveyard, plussing Liliana can be a very dicey proposition. So Brian is actually with less interaction than he normally would have against these combo decks.
So Bob is just going to go ahead and cast a Night's Whisper, and it actually, the Splice onto Arcane cost for that Through the Breach is only 4 mana. So had he drawn a land that turn, he could have just spliced the Through the Breach onto the Nourishing Shoal and kept the Desperate Ritual into his hand. There's a lot of interesting lines that this deck could take. Yeah,
normally the Scavenging Ooze could have some utility in breaking up a Goryo's Vengeance combo kill, because the Scavenging Ooze can exile cards from Bob's graveyard. But if Bob goes through this Through the Breach route, that Scavenging Ooze is just not really going to do much.
So it looks like Brian did draw into another Thoughtseize, and he's going to cast it here. And it looks like we've got Through the Breach, Desperate Ritual, Borborygmos Enraged, World Spine Worm, a Nourishing Shoal, and a Gristlebrand. And what do you take?
I think you have to take the Through the Breach because otherwise the Grizzlebrand or the Borborgamos getting put into play are both problems. Also, the World Spine Worm is a huge problem. So Through the Breach is really the big important piece of Bob's hand right now, and he has a lot of redundancy on the other things.
So it looks like Brian did take that Through the Breach. Does not look like he has another land to play. Bob is going to go ahead and fetch, and after taking 2 damage from the Scavenging Ooze, I believe Brian's just going to pass the turn.
And while the Scavenging Ooze has some utility in this matchup, it's not a particularly fast clock. Brian would really like to have something like a Tarmogoyf to get this game over quickly, because the more time that Bob has to draw cards, the more likely he's going to be able to piece together a combo.
So Brian's just going to go ahead and attack with his Scavenging Ooze. After Bob passes the turn without making his 4th land drop, and then just pass the turn back. So it looks like Bob did draw a Simian Spirit Guide here, which will give him another mana, but there really isn't much he can do yet until he draws something like Through the Breach. So
yeah, and we saw that Brian actually had a Dark Confidant that he could have played on his turn, but he's got so much respect for Bob's potential to win with Goryo's Vengeance that he didn't want to tap out. He wanted to keep that Scavenging Ooze available to exile something from the graveyard or be able to cast that Terminate in Brian's hand.
So it looks like Brian is just going to go ahead and use that Lightning Bolt on Bob's end step. On his turn, he's going to use an Inquisition of Kozilek. Take a look at Bob's hand just to see what he has. It's like Bob was able to find another copy of Nourishing Shoal, so he does have 2 other green cards that he can get rid of: Borborygmos, Enraged, and World Spine Worm. So technically, Bob Huang is at a whole bunch of life, which is going to give him time to try and draw into his combo.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the shoals are going to give him a lot of time, and that's certainly what he wants. This Scavenging Ooze isn't doing a whole lot to whittle away his life, but Brian is doing a good job of drawing these discard spells and kind of picking apart Bob's draw. You can really see how Bob's draw, or Bob's combo essentially, is based on having multiple pieces, and Brian keeps hitting the pieces that Bob needs the most.
So Brian went ahead and attacked with his Scavenging Ooze, then just passed the turn. Still doesn't have a 3rd land, but he is trying to whittle Bob down. Now Bob did find a Faithless Looting on his turn, which he's going to cast. Looks like he's going to draw into a World Spine Worm and a Manamorpho, so now he does have to choose to discard 2 cards. And it could be a liability to try and put that Grizzlebrand into the graveyard, because Brian does have that Scavenging Ooze.
The other thing that's interesting here is Bob only has 2 Borborgamos, and that is a big part of him actually winning all in one turn off of Through the Breach or Goryo's Vengeance. So if he discards one of those Borborgamoses, he can find himself in a situation where later on he'll only have 1, and that could be 0 at some point.
So it looks like he's thinking about discarding Grizzlebrand and something else. Maybe World Spine Worm and Borborygmos. That World Spine Worm is going to trigger to shuffle back into the deck.
Yeah, right now Bob's hand is just kind of clogged up with fatties. He doesn't really want to discard these because not only is it going to be a good target for the Scavenging Ooze getting exiled so that Bob can't use it, it's also going to increase the clock that Brian is putting on Bob.
So I think he might be doing this to try and get Brian to use his Scavenging Ooze before it shuffles back in.
And if he just magically hits a Goryo's Vengeance
Off this Manamorphose,
that would be insane. Kind of rolling the dice on the variance. Let's see where this can go. Just a land.
So it looks like he's going to eat the Borborygmos. World Spine Worm is going to go back into the deck. Then I imagine Bob's going to pass back now.
How exciting would that have been if he had gotten Goryo's Vengeance there?
I was ready.
We would have been screaming for sure. That would have been insane.
I was ready. You got to give yourself chances to win.
Yeah, for sure. Even if it's a slim chance.
So it looks like Bob is just going to go ahead and gain some life now. That way he's not at risk of dying to double Lightning Bolt when he tries to do so next turn.
Yeah, he knows that even if Brian had Lightning Bolts in his hand, they wouldn't have any other good targets. Bob hasn't played any cards that would be good targets for them, so Brian may just fire them off if they're sitting in his hand.
So that's going to put him up to 17 and give him quite a few extra turns here. But Brian is just going to keep doing the same game plan. At this point, he does have a clock. He does have inevitability. Bob does have to try and cobble some way together to win the game.
Yeah, Bob still has quite a bit of time. His resources are getting drained a little bit, but he's not in danger of dying soon. He's still got some time, and even if he comes very close to dying, depending on how his combo is sequence, he can win all of the sudden, even from a very low life total.
So it looks like Brian went ahead and played an Overgrown Tune untapped, went ahead and shocked himself down to 9, got in for 3, and is going to pass the turn now. There are a couple creatures in Bob's graveyard that Brian could try and eat here on his end step, but he does have to worry about the potential of Bob comboing at instant speed.
Yeah, I personally would have really liked to have seen Brian drop the Dark Confidant that's been sitting in his hand. He just wants to see more cards, see more disruption, develop a bit more of a clock. He's taking a more conservative route, and I can certainly understand wanting to respect Bob's deck. But at the same time, you know, I just want to play Dark Confidant and start drawing a bunch of extra cards.
I can't blame you. So Bob is just going to go ahead and flash back his Faithless Looting, and there is a Goryo's Vengeance. But Brian does have multiple green mana available.
And the reason I would have liked playing Dark Confidant this turn, but not any of the previous turns, is because Brian finally hit his 3rd land drop, so he would be able to play the Dark Confidant and still break up a Goryo's Vengeance. So,
well, looks like Bob is deciding what he wants to get rid of. It's going to be a Vengeance and a Desperate Ritual. He's just going to play a land and pass the turn. And at this point, he's just hoping to draw into another Through the Breach.
Yeah, absolutely. He kind of knows that he's not going to get anything done with his graveyard, so throwing away that Goryo's Vengeance is no big deal. He has plenty of land drops, so the Desperate Ritual is losing its utility. And he just wants to, like you said, just hit it through the breach, and then hopefully he can leverage that to a victory.
So Brian's just gone ahead and going to eat the Simian Spirit Guide that's in Bob's graveyard, as well as throw a Lightning Bolt at Bob's face. Now he just drew into a Liliana, which I don't think is something that he wants to try to deploy at this point, but I do like the attack for 4. It's going to bring Bob down to 6, and at this point we might see him play that Dark Confidant since it will threaten lethal next turn.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing is that I believe Brian has, does he have one more Lightning Bolt in his hand?
He's used 2. I don't think he has any more.
Okay, because that would be another 2-turn clock.
So it looks like he's not going to use that or cast that Dark Confidant. Bob's going to fetch down to 5 on Brian's end step, and at this point, it's pretty much just Through the Breach or bust.
Yeah,
and
I believe Brian has a Terminate in his hand, so not tapping out on this turn and knowing that Bob has so few draw steps left may actually work out to be a good play, because if Bob casts a creature, he's going to need to attack with his Grizzlebrand before he can draw cards on it, and that'll give Brian an opportunity to just terminate it.
So Bob's just going to go ahead and Serum Vision, scry 2 cards to the bottom. He does have 2 Nourishing Shoals in his hand, so he is going to be able to gain 2 life if he needs to. This attack is going to bring him down to 1, and he is going to be dead on the next turn unless he's able to do something.
Yeah, and this just isn't working out for Bob. This is probably going to be his last turn, and we're kind of seeing how the Goryo's Vengeance deck, despite it being so powerful and capable of such busted draws, sometimes things just don't come together. 1 or 2 good discard spells can really throw your game off, and your deck ends up just not really doing anything. But that's just, you know, comes with the territory.
Well, it looks like Bob was able to find a World Spine Worm off of that Serum Vision, so he can gain 11 life here, and that's going to give him at least 1 more draw step.
He's still going to be in a tough spot, though, where even if he threw the breaches in a Grizzlebrand, it may be a little tricky for him to
actually win the game.
Yeah, do much with it.
So Brian was able to draw into a land here. Looks like he's just going to attack.
Now I want to see the Dark Confidant. Come on.
It's going to bring Bob down to 4. And I think he's thinking about playing the Bob, and there we go.
There we go. Perfect.
There is your Dark Confidant.
So this is super marginal, but I would have preferred him to keep the Overgrown Tomb tapped instead of the Blood Crypt, but, you know, like I said, super marginal. So let's see what Bob can do. This may be one of his last turns in this game.
So he was able to cast a Faithless Looting, drew into...
Man, and he has just been drawing all of his fatties. I mean, he's drawn so many of his creatures without drawing that many ways to put him into the play.
And now those 2 Gristlebrands that are in his graveyard, that is going to make this a lethal attack for Brian if he eats those with the Scavenging Ooze.
Yeah. Yeah, really tough spot for Bob. Normally the Jund deck doesn't have enough interaction to really interact with what the Goryo's Vengeance deck is doing, but things kind of broke exactly how Brian needed them to break, which is really fortunate because things get a lot better for him post-board, and Bob doesn't actually have that many good ways to improve his deck in the post-board games.
Absolutely. So it looks like we've got Bob is thinking about potentially flashing back a Faithless Looting here. And so there's a Goryo's Vengeance and a Borborygmos. But I don't really think there's too much that he can do at this point.
Yeah, it's really tough. I mean, these Faithless Lootings are not particularly good card advantage, and he's already 2-for-1 himself a few times trying to gain life, and Bob is really just running out of resources.
So it looks like he's passed the turn. Brian's going to go ahead and eat a creature on his end step. It's going to go up to 11, grow that Scavenging Ooze up to a 5.
And he's going to be able to untap, eat another creature, and potentially attack for lethal.
So let's not miss our Bob trigger. It's going to be a Raging Ravine. Brian's going to draw a card for his turn. And then, like you said, all he needs to do is eat another creature out of Bob Huang's graveyard and attack for the full 8 and put this game away. I feel like Jund is kind of stealing this one.
I do feel like Jund is stealing this one as well. I mean, it's not a great matchup for the Jund deck, but this is one of the issues with the Goryo's Vengeance deck is it's just not that consistent. It can be broken up with a few timely discard spells depending on what Bob's draw looks like.
It was interesting way back on the end of Brian's turn 3. Bob had 2 lands and a fetch and just needed a land or a Spirit Guide to win, and he fetched on Brian's end step.
Yeah.
I wonder if it might have been better just to leave an extra land in the deck rather than fetch.
Yeah, I don't know. It's tough because Bob life total is quite the resource in this situation. He uses it not only to draw cards but buy draw steps. So I do agree that that is a point of contention, but I can see an argument for both sides.
So it looks like Bob was able to use a Nourishing Shoal, getting rid of that Borborygmos to stay alive here for a little bit longer. And at this point, you have to feel like there isn't much else that Bob can cobble together.
Yeah, this is going to be one of the few good times to drop a Liliana in this matchup. Just take the last card out of Bob's hand, and then you've still got the Forest available with the Scavenging Ooze to blank any top deck Goryo's Vengeance.
So Bob's going to discard that Gristlebrand and draw for his turn, and then he's just going to go ahead and scoop everything up. So Brian is going to be able to take game 1 off of Bob Huang here in our finals on Jund against Goryo's Vengeance. Brian was our 7th place seed coming into the top 8. Bob was our 1st place seed, so Brian was able to steal that game on the draw.
Yeah, that was quite the upset. I mean, Brian is playing just a super fair deck. Bob is the 1st seed, coming in with this hot, busted combo deck that can win on turn 2, has already done so in this top 8. And Brian stealing that game is, pretty surprising.
So let's go ahead and take a look at the sideboards for these 2 players and see what kind of options we have. Now Bob does have 3 Pact of Negation, a Beseiju who shelters all, a Rending Volley, 2 copies of Pyroclasm, a Sudden Shock, 2 copies of Painful Truths, 2 Shatterstorm, and 2 Inquisition of Kozilek. What do you think Bob's going to bring in here?
So I think Bob, there's a good chance that he brings in the Painful Truths. We saw in the last game that even though the Jund deck has Tarmogoyf, which is just a phenomenal creature, a lot of its other threats are a little on the small side and are slow clock. So Bob's life total is important, but the 3 cards are probably worth more to fight through those discard spells.
As for Brian, we've got a Thoughtseize, an Unravel the Aether, a Pyroclasm, an Ancient Grudge, 2 Kitchen Finks, 4 Fulminator Mage, 1 copy of Painful Truths, a Shatterstorm, an Obstinate Baloth, a Knight of Soul's Betrayal, and a Huntmaster of the Fells. What do you think we're going to see there?
So Brian definitely has a lot of dead removal spells that he can take out. I think the cards that he'll bring in are Thoughtseize, and I also think that he'll be bringing in the Fulminator Mages simply because they're just an extra piece of interaction. I mean, Bob is looking to get a lot of mana and then being able to do some funky stuff with that, and fulminating those lands is one way that Brian can knock him off balance.
Fulminating?
Yeah, that's the verb.
I like that. Is that a real word?
Oh, in Sugarloaf, it's a real word.
Yeah, just fulminating?
Yeah.
Are you fulminating Reed's lands all the time?
Oh, I'm fulminating everyone's lands all the time.
All right, so again, we've got Brian Huffman on Jund, Bob Huang on Goryo's Vengeance. While they finish up their sideboarding, let's go ahead and talk about what's happening next weekend.
Ooh, what's that?
the Oath of the Gatewatch pre-release.
Sick.
So for those of you who happen to be in the Star City or in the Roanoke area, you can come to the StarCityGames.com Game Center and get this awesome Oath of the Gatehop playmat just by playing in any of the pre-release flights. It's absolutely free. Next weekend, January 16th through 17th, limited edition playmat. Go.starcitygames.com/pre-release for details and to pre-register. These things are super cute.
Yeah, these things are super fun. I remember getting one that had a bunch of birds on it, and I gave it to my mom because she loves feeding her birds. I have some other friends, you know, I like to find playmats to give to people that relate to their own interests, because these playmats are just cool, they're cute, and even people who don't play Magic like them.
So again, StarCityGames.com Game Center if you happen to be in the Roanoke area. You can get this limited edition playmat absolutely free just for playing in any of the pre-release flights. Go.StarCityGames.com/pre-release for details and to pre-register. Make sure you do pre-register because those things fill up quickly.
Oh yeah.
So we're going to come back here, Bob Huang versus Brian Huffman in the finals of SCG Charlotte. Bob was first place coming into the top 8. Brian was 7th, Bob on Goryo's Vengeance, Brian on his Jund deck, and it has just been, this entire weekend has been pretty awesome.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, this has been exciting, and this is a great way to, you know, top it all off. We've got just the super fair deck versus the super busted combo deck. We've seen everything between throughout the week, and now we get the two extremes kind of facing off. It's almost like the big question in modern, is it better to be more on the fair side, or is it better to be more on the unfair side? And this is kind of, you know, what's going to settle it.
Well, this is definitely that question. Now, Bob is no stranger to the finals of SCG Opens. He did win the Open shortly after Treasure Cruise was printed in Legacy with Blue Red Delver. He also went on to do very well in the Legacy Championships that year at Eternal Weekend, and he is just quite the brewer. He likes to work on these unfair decks. He likes to push the limit of the format, I'd say.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, a lot of the pro players, you look at them, and a lot of them are really focused on grinding points, just winning a lot. Bob is a different kind of pro player, where I kind of think of him more as like a scientist. You know, he's kind of a research and developer. He wants to win, but he's more interested in finding what wins.
I can definitely appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'm not a very big brewer myself, but I do like to tune decks, so
yeah.
I can't tell you what to play, but I can help you fix what you're going to play.
Yeah, well, if you want to win, knowing who the good deck designers are and who are the ones that are going to develop the hot new tech, they're good people to keep an eye on.
There we go, Bob Huang. Let's see what you got. So we have a Bloodstained Mire for his first turn. Going to pass it over to Brian Huffman.
And I believe in Bob's hang we actually see a Painful Truths, so it looks like he is bringing in that card out of the sideboard.
There's a chance that it just gets taken here by this Thoughtseize.
Yeah, I certainly think it will. I mean, it's his best source of card advantage, and that's one of the ways that Bob fights through all these discard spells. And the other cards, they're just redundant. You know, if you take one Izzet Charm, he still has one. If you take a Shoal, he still has the other.
And so Bob's going to reveal here Island, Nourishing Shoal, Nourishing Shoal, 2 Izzet Charms, and a Painful Truths. And again, I think Brian's probably going to have to take this Painful Truths. Everything else is just pretty redundant. Now, it looks like he does have a Tarmogoyf in his hand, so he does have Thoughtseize and a Tarmogoyf, which is what he's looking for.
Yeah, that is certainly the best start for this Jund deck. We saw in the previous game, the Scavenging Ooze, it was a really slow clock. Things worked out for Brian just because he just had the right discard spells at the right time, and Bob's hand never kind of became anything that was relevant. But this Tarmogoyf is really going to shave a lot of turns off of Bob's clock, and he's not going to have many turns.
So it looks like Bob did draw into his second copy of Painful Truths that he sided in, which is going to be a really good play next turn if he's able to draw a third land. But for now, he just played an island and passed. Brian Huffman's going to fetch with his Verdant Catacombs and very likely cast a Tarmogoyf.
Yeah, and I'd said during the sideboarding that I liked bringing in Painful Truths because normally Brian isn't going to have much of a clock. This is the one case scenario where Brian will have a decent clock. This 2-mana creature, it's going to be swinging in for just 2 right now, but if Brian can get some other things in the graveyard, it's going to grow and it can be a serious contender. This is one of the most... Well, that's not one of the creature I was talking about, but it looks like he wants to get this on the board first so that he can start to harass Bob's graveyard.
Yeah, that's interesting that he decided to go with the Scavenging Ooze when he knew that there were 2 copies of Izzet Charm in Bob's hand. Although now that there's an instant and a creature in the graveyard, this Tarmogoyf is going to be a 4/5 once he finally plays it. But that Scavenging Ooze just feels like it was kind of thrown away.
Yeah, I agree, and I wouldn't have minded...
Ooh.
Wow, well this is really good. So knowing that Bob missed the land drop, this Fulminator Mage is going to be brutal.
Yeah, so the Fulminator Mage is going to enter the battlefield. We're going to try and take care of that Blood Crypt, and now Bob's going to have a choice on what he wants to do with some of his mana. He might decide to draw 2 and discard 2 with that Is It Charm, but that Fulminator Mage is going to be real gross.
Yeah, for sure. I think right now Bob is thinking about firing off his Is It Charm, drawing 2, discarding 2, digging for more lands. I think he basically has to do that at this point in time. Well, as soon as Brian fires off that Fulminator.
I think he already flinged it at it. So it looks like Bob's going to hold on to that Is It Charm. Just going to draw and pass.
So surprising set of plays. I really would have preferred Brian to do this basically all after the Tarmogoyf so that he'd be getting some clocking in, but this is all going to work out fine for Brian anyway.
Yeah, now the Tarmogoyf is going to be a 4/5. And next turn, if he does have another land, he's also going to be able to crash with that Raging Ravine, and that is going to be a quick clock.
Yeah, and Brian knows that Bob Huang is really strapped on resources, and so I wouldn't be surprised to see Brian start feeling more comfortable to tap out just to try to take out some of Bob's draw steps.
So it looks like Brian has picked up a Ghost Quarter for the turn, which is going to allow him to activate that Raging Ravine if he wants to. He'll be able to crash in for 8, which would put Bob down to 11. Looks like he also has another fetch land in his hand. Although he might just play it a little bit safe and cast that Blackleaf Cliffs. Although I'm not quite sure exactly what he has in his hand to interact with Bob, and I think Bob is just priced into doing whatever he can when he has it.
Yeah, it seems like at a lot of the forks in the road, Brian has chosen to play this matchup a little conservatively, just out of respect of how powerful this Goryo's Vengeance deck is and how explosive it can be. I mean, it can come out of nowhere. Bob has a Simian Spirit Guide in hand, you know, a Ritual, things can be off to the races even with just 1 land drop.
Looks like Bob does just have a full 4 Nourishing Shoals in his hand, so worst comes to worst, he can gain 4 life if he needs to by casting 2 of those shoals and removing the other ones. But if he does happen to find something like Worldspine Worm, they can buffer his life total quite a bit and stay alive for a few more turns.
Yeah, that's certainly a line of play that Bob's going to be looking towards. It's definitely not the ideal case scenario. Using those cards as purely life gain spells when he doesn't have a Grizzlebrand on the board, they're essentially buying time, but they're card disadvantage. And he can find himself in a situation like last game where he just sort of runs out of resources.
So it looks like he's going to use his Is It Charm now to draw 2 and discard 2. And he was able to find another Goryo's Vengeance and a land finally, but no fatty to put into the graveyard.
Yeah, I certainly would have preferred to see him use that Is It Charm earlier when the Fulminator Mage first got fired off, but
yeah, I'm not quite sure what he was waiting for.
Yeah, but it looks like now he just feels priced into using it. He's running out of time, and there it goes.
So it looks like we're going to discard 2 Nourishing Shoals. We're going to play a Steam Vents tapped and pass the turn back. It is important to note that Bob does not have access to any black mana right now.
Yeah, he has those Goryo's Vengeances, but he still has nothing in his graveyard to target with it. So not only does he need a black source, he also needs a creature to target with it and a way to put that creature in the graveyard. If he draws something like Faithless Looting, then some of that can start to come together, but we'll see how things go.
Now, it looks like Brian might have drawn another copy of Tarmogoyf, which is going to put a lot of power onto the battlefield.
Yeah, it looks like he was doing some math trying to figure out if just attacking with the Raging Ravine would be a faster clock, but I have to imagine that playing the Tarmogoyf now and then activating the Raging Ravine next turn is just better.
So it looks like he's going to use the Ghost Quarter here, which is going to give Bob access to black mana.
Yeah, that's kind of a surprising play. I guess the advantage here, though, is that if he has black mana, he doesn't have red mana. But I agree. I'm a little surprised by that play.
So Brian's going to use that Ghost Quarter there on the Steam Vents. It's going to give Bob access to some black mana. Looks like Bob is going to draw a Manamorphose, which he can't quite cast.
Wait. Yeah, it looks like Bob caught himself.
So it looks like he actually just has nothing that he can do outside of gaining 2 life, which can put him up to 13. And Brian's going to be able to come across here for 12, which will make Bob just go back down to 1, but it's still not looking very good for him.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen this Goryo's Vengeance deck have such powerful draws, but when you have these really powerful decks, a lot of the times they're a little inconsistent, and that is essentially, you know, how they're sort of balanced.
Yeah. So it's like Brian is going to come across with all of his creatures. 3/4 power creatures is going to attack for 12. Bob is going to go ahead and Nourishing Shoal, getting rid of that Manamorphose, going up to 13. 12 damage is going to bring him all the way down to 1. And Brian's just going to say go, see what you got.
Yeah, this is going to be tough for Bob. I don't think he has any outs. He can't even crack a fetch land. Not that he could do anything with it.
So Bob's going to go ahead and draw a Night's Whisper and cast it, go to -1 and lose. And Brian Huffman is going to be your SCG Charlotte winner with Jund.
Yeah, I mean...
Even though you want a Bob to win, you got to be happy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's almost like some sort of omen. I mean, every single Modern tournament I played in for quite some time, I played Jund. So this, you know, I feel like it's some sort of sign.
Yeah, this entire weekend has just been crazy. There's been a lot of different crazy decks. We saw a lot of Infect, a lot of Twin. We saw a little bit of Jund towards the end of today, and here it is just winning the tournament.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty surprising to me that we had such a huge diversity of decks and to find Jund on top. A lot of times, and I know I myself have said this before, when the metagame is so diverse, it's hard to play a deck like Jund because Jund usually wins by having really good sideboard games and being able to be prepared for everything. But when the metagame is so diverse and so wide, it's hard to have those sideboard cards for everything. But Brian seems to have found a good configuration where he kind of is prepared for basically everything he faced today.